You'll be mine before sundown." His arm locked around her waist before she could scream. The stallion spun hard, and the armed men behind them pulled their horses to a dead stop because they knew that voice. They knew that name. Ethan Calloway didn't make threats. He made facts. Lillian Brooks hit his chest with both fists. "Put me down. I don't belong to anyone." He didn't flinch, didn't slow. "Stay alive first," he said. "Hate me later." If this story already has your heart racing, you're exactly where you belong. Subscribe to this channel and follow every part until the very end, because this one doesn't end the way you expect. And drop a comment telling me what city you're watching from. I want to see how far this story travels. The horse went down hard. One moment, Lillian Brooks was riding at full gallop across the open prairie, the wind tearing at her hair, her heels driving into the animal's flanks with everything she had. The next moment, the mare's front legs folded, and the ground came up fast. Lillian threw herself sideways, hit the grass, shoulder, first rolled twice, and came up on her hands and knees with dirt in her mouth and her heart slamming against her ribs. Behind her, she could hear them. 3 riders, maybe 4. The thunder of hooves that had been chasing her for the better part of an hour. She got to her feet. The mare was down sides, heaving legs trembling. Not dead exhausted. Ridden too hard for too long in the afternoon heat. Lillian understood that. She had done the same thing to herself. She looked left. Flat open prairie. No cover. She looked right. A dry creek bed, maybe 200 yards with a line of scrub brush along its banks. She started running. She was fast. She had always been fast. Her father used to say she ran like something that refused to be caught. But she was also wearing riding boots and a traveling dress, and she had been awake for nearly 30 hours straight, and the men behind her were on horseback. She made it maybe 50 yards before she heard the first rider crest the rise behind her. There she is. She didn't look back. Looking back slowed you down and told you things you didn't need to know. She kept running, kept her eyes on that creek bed, kept her breathing controlled. Her father had taught her that too. Breathe through fear, or it owns you. She had almost made it to the brush when the rider cut around in front of her, wheeling his horse sideways to block her path. He was a big man, red-faced from the sun, wearing a deputy's badge that Lillian knew had been bought and paid for by Victor Crane. "That's enough running, Miss Brooks." He didn't bother pretending to be polite anymore. There was nobody out here to see. "Mr. Crane just wants to talk." "Mr. Crane," Lillian said, breathing hard, "can talk to himself." She tried to go around him. The horse stepped sideways, cutting her off. The other riders came up behind her, forming a loose half-circle. 3 men total, all armed, all hired. One of them younger, with a thin beard and a smirk that made her skin crawl, reached down toward her from his saddle. "Come on now, sweetheart. Don't make this harder than it needs to be." Lillian took a step back. The man with the badge moved his horse forward, tightening the circle. She was looking for any gap, any angle, any possibility at all when she heard it. Not hoofbeats. One set of hoofbeats, but moving differently from the others. Faster, deliberate. The kind of sound a horse makes when its rider knows exactly where he's going and intends to get there before anyone can stop him. She looked up. He came over the ridge at a full run. The stallion was black, not dark brown, not dappled, but pure black, and it moved the way no horse she had ever seen moved, with a fluid, ground-eating stride that covered distance faster than seemed possible. The man on its back sat like he had been born there. He wasn't standing in the stirrups or leaning forward or doing anything dramatic. He was just riding relaxed and certain the way a man moves through a space he owns. He came straight at the 3 riders and didn't slow down. The deputy's horse shied first. Animals could read people, and whatever this rider carried in him, the horses felt it before the men did. The deputy swore and hauled on his reins, and his horse turned sideways and stamped. The black stallion pulled up hard, 10 feet away. No skidding, no stumbling, just stopped precise and immediate, the way a well-trained animal responds to a rider it trusts completely. The man looked at the 3 deputies. He didn't say anything. He just looked. Lillian had grown up around men who used silence as a weapon. Her father had been one. Victor Crane was another kind. He used lawyers and money and false smiles. But this man's silence was different. It was the silence of someone who had nothing to prove and nothing to explain, and absolutely no doubt about how this moment was going to end. The deputy with the badge found his voice first. "Calloway, this doesn't concern you." Ethan Calloway said nothing. "We have business with the woman. Legal business." "I don't see any papers," Ethan said. His voice was low, even unhurried. The kind of voice that made you lean in to catch it, and then wish you hadn't, because once it had your full attention, you realized exactly how dangerous it was. "We don't need papers to escort a woman back to her guardian. She doesn't look like she wants to be escorted." The deputy shifted in his saddle. The other two men exchanged a glance. They were hired muscle, not true believers. They'd ride hard for pay, but they weren't ready to die for it. "Victor Crane hired us," the thin-bearded one said, like the name itself was supposed to end the conversation. Ethan turned his head and looked at him for a long moment. "I know who hired you," he said. Then he turned his horse and rode the 10 feet to where Lillian was standing. She looked up at him. He looked down at her. He was older than she'd first thought, mid-30s, with a face that had spent years in weather and showed it. Dark hair, a jaw that hadn't seen a razor in a few days, eyes the color of creek water in winter. Not warm, not cold, just clear. "You want to get out of here?" he asked. It was not the question she'd expected. She had expected him to be another man making another decision for her. Instead, he asked. "Yes," she said. He reached down. She took his hand. He pulled her up in front of him in one clean motion, settling her across the saddle with the practiced ease of a man who had done this 100 times. His arm came around her waist, not gripping, but present, and the stallion was already moving before she had time to find her balance. She heard one of the deputies shout behind them. Ethan put his mouth near her ear and said loud enough for the men behind them to hear, "You'll be mine before sundown." The words hit her like a slap. She went rigid in the saddle, and she felt his arm tighten fractionally, not controlling, just steadying, and then the stallion found its stride, and the prairie began moving past them at a speed that made conversation difficult. She heard the pursuit behind them slow. "Stop." She looked back despite herself. The 3 riders sat motionless on the ridge watching them go, not following. "Why did they stop?" she demanded. "Old custom," Ethan said. "Man claims a woman under the frontier right of protection. No one else can touch her for 30 days without her consent. Not legally. Not even Victor Crane." "That custom," Lillian said, keeping her voice very controlled, "treats women like property." "Yes," Ethan said. "It does. And you used it anyway. You had about 30 seconds before that deputy grabbed you off your feet. I used what was available." A pause. "You can be angry about it later. I'm angry about it now." "I can see that." She hit his chest with the back of her fist. Not hard enough to mean something. "I don't belong to you," she said. "I don't belong to anyone." "That's correct," Ethan said, as if she'd told him something obvious and uncontroversial. "You don't." She twisted to look at him. The words had surprised her. Men who said things like, "You'll be mine," did not typically follow it up with quiet agreement that she belonged to no one. Then what was that back there? A bluff, he said. For their benefit, not yours. She studied his face. He was watching the horizon ahead of them, not her scanning the land with the automatic vigilance of a man who had learned not to trust stillness. "You don't even know me," she said. "No," he agreed. "Then why?" "Because there were 3 of them, and 1 of you, and they weren't going to ask nicely." He said it the same way he said everything else, flat, even without decoration. That's all. Lillian faced forward again. The prairie moved past them. The sun was dropping, throwing long shadows across the grass. She could feel the heat of the afternoon still radiating off the earth, and she could feel the solid warmth of the man behind her. And she was exhausted and frightened and furious all at once. which was not a new feeling for her. She had been feeling all of those things for 3 weeks now. But the proportions were shifting in ways she hadn't expected. "Where are you taking me?" she asked. "My ranch. Mountains about 2 hours north. Nobody follows me up there they don't want followed." "And then what?" "And then you rest, eat. We figure out what comes next." "I can figure out what comes next on my own." "I don't doubt it," Ethan said. "But you don't have a horse." She didn't have an answer to that. She pressed her lips together and looked at the mountains rising in the distance, purple and enormous in the afternoon light. "I don't need saving," she said, quieter now. "Noted," he said. "You still needed a horse." They rode hard for the first hour without stopping. Ethan knew the land she could tell by the way he moved through it, making small adjustments in direction that she couldn't have explained if asked. Choosing paths that weren't paths, reading the terrain, the way someone reads a familiar book. Twice he turned them away from what looked like easier routes without explaining why, and twice she looked back and understood old wagon trails that would have left them visible for miles. He pulled up once at a rocky outcrop and listened. Lillian listened too. Nothing. Wind. Somewhere far to the south, a hawk. "We're clean," he said more to himself than to her, and they started moving again. She spent the second hour doing what she always did when she was frightened, and trying not to show it she observed. She had learned this from her father, who had believed that information was the only real protection available to a person in a dangerous world. The man sitting behind her was known by name to Victor Crane's hired men. That meant something. The deputy had said his name the way you say the name of something you've decided not to touch, respectful and wary in equal measure. Ethan Calloway. She didn't know the name, but she hadn't been in Wyoming territory long enough to know most names. She had only arrived 3 months ago after her father's death, and she had spent most of those 3 months dealing with lawyers and her uncle's escalating demands and Victor Crane's visits, which always felt less like courtesy calls and more like a man measuring something he intended to take. "How do you know Victor Crane?" she asked. Ethan took a moment before answering. "Everyone in 3 counties knows Victor Crane." "That's not what I asked." Another pause. "He tried to buy a section of land east of my property 2 years ago. Timber rights mostly. The family he was buying from didn't want to sell. He bought the county assessor instead and had their taxes tripled. What happened? They sold. And you, I paid their taxes," Ethan said. "Mine and theirs both. Every year after that until they got back on their feet." Lillian absorbed that. "He must have hated you for it." "He doesn't hate me," Ethan said. "He ignores me. Men like Crane don't hate people who inconvenience them. They just wait for the next opportunity." "He's not waiting anymore," Lillian said. "He hired a county official to draw up papers declaring my uncle my legal guardian. My uncle owes Crane a lot of money. Victor Crane wants my father's land. The marriage was—" She stopped. Even saying it out loud still made her stomach turn. It was just a legal mechanism to transfer the inheritance. Ethan said nothing for a moment. "How much land?" he asked. 3,000 acres of grazing land in the valley. The deed is in my name. My father made sure of it." Her voice caught slightly on her father's name and she pushed it back down. Later. There would be time for that later. A woman can't control her own property in this territory if she has a living male guardian. That's the law. "That's the law," Ethan agreed, and from his tone she couldn't tell whether he was stating a fact or expressing contempt. Possibly both. "My uncle signed papers declaring me incompetent to manage my own estate. Victor Crane's lawyer drew them up." She was talking faster now, the words coming out in a controlled rush, the way she had told this story to herself 100 times in the dark, running through it, looking for the angle she'd missed the door she hadn't tried. "I have the original deed. I have my father's will, but without a judge willing to hear my case. The papers my uncle signed carry legal weight." "A judge like the one in Millerton," Ethan said. She blinked. "You know about that. I know Crane owns the judge in Millerton. Has for years." He paused. "There's a federal circuit judge comes through Laramie every 3 months. Next visit is in 6 weeks. 6 weeks. She counted backward and forward in her head simultaneously, the way she always thought, running multiple calculations at once. Crane won't wait 6 weeks. He'll move before then. Probably, Ethan said. So we need 6 weeks that he can't move. She turned her head. Figure of speech, he said. She wasn't sure she believed that, but she let it go. The mountains were closer now. She could feel the temperature dropping slightly, the subtle shift that came with elevation, and the land was changing under them, the flat prairie giving way to rising ground, rocky and uneven. You don't know anything about me, she said again. I know you ran, he said. And I know you ran toward something, not just away. That stopped her. What does that mean? Most people run away from danger and stop as soon as they feel safe. You were pushing that horse past its limit. That's not fear. That's a destination. She was quiet for a moment. I was trying to reach the telegraph office in Garrison. I have a letter I need sent to a lawyer in Cheyenne. There's a telegraph at my ranch, Ethan said. She looked at him again. He was watching the trail ahead. You have a telegraph line up in the mountains. Put it in 2 years ago. A beat. Expensive. Worth it. She turned back around and didn't say anything for a while. The sun was getting lower, the sky deepening toward gold and amber at the horizon. Her shoulder ached where she'd hit the ground when the mare went down. She was aware of her own exhaustion in the specific heavy way that came after adrenaline faded, the weight of it settling into her bones. She was also aware against her will that she felt safer than she had in 3 weeks. She didn't like that. Safety was the most dangerous thing you could feel when your situation hadn't actually changed. You said 30 days, she said. The custom. Yes. And after 30 days? After 30 days, you make your own choices. What do you get out of this? He didn't answer immediately. The stallion picked its way up a steeper section of trail, and Ethan's arm shifted slightly around her, a small, practical adjustment of balance. I get Victor Crane reminded that not everyone in this territory belongs to him, he said finally. That's not a good enough reason to make enemies of hired gunmen, she said. I saw how you looked at them. You weren't surprised. You expected trouble. I rode toward gunfire, he said. I generally expect trouble when I do that. You specifically rode toward them. You knew something was happening. A pause that lasted a beat too long. I saw your horse go down from the ridge, saw the riders. And you just happened to be on that ridge at that moment. Another pause. My north pasture runs along there. She filed that away, the half answer the slight hesitation. A man who spoke in flat, direct sentences didn't typically struggle with simple geography. She didn't push it. Not yet. They came over a final rise, and she saw the ranch below them. It was larger than she'd expected. Not grand, but solid. A main house built of heavy timber, low and long, with covered porches on both sides. A barn that was clearly well maintained. Fenced paddocks, several horses moving in them. A bunkhouse set back from the main buildings. And beyond all of it, the mountains rising up close and enormous and indifferent to everything happening below. A small cluster of figures ran out from the barn as they approached. Children, 4 of them ranging from maybe 7 to 12 years old, spilling out into the yard with the energy of animals too long penned. They pulled up short when they saw the extra rider on Ethan's horse. The oldest, a girl with dark braids and sharp eyes that reminded Lillian uncomfortably of herself at that age, looked from Lillian to Ethan and back. Who's she? The girl asked. A guest, Ethan said. She hurt. No. She looks hurt. She's fine, Lillian said, because she was more than capable of answering questions about herself. The girl with the braids considered this. Your shoulder's bleeding, she said. Lillian looked down. The girl was right. She'd torn the sleeve of her dress in the fall, and a scrape along her forearm had bled through the fabric. It's nothing, Lillian said. Clara, Ethan said. Get the medical kit from the kitchen. Tommy, water the horse. He swung down from the saddle, then reached up for Lillian. She started to say she didn't need help, and then decided that was a principle worth picking in a moment when she wasn't swaying with exhaustion, and let him steady her to the ground. Her legs held. Barely. "I'm fine," she told him. "You keep saying that," he said. "It keeps being true." He almost smiled. She caught the edge of it, a slight shift at the corner of his mouth gone before it properly arrived. "Come inside," he said. "I'll make coffee." Hugh. The house was not what she expected. She'd expected Spartan, the home of a man living alone in the mountains, furnished with only what was strictly necessary, nothing soft, anywhere. And it was spare. There was no clutter, no decoration for decoration's sake, no evidence of the kind of comforts people accumulated when they stayed somewhere long enough to feel at home, but it was not cold. There were books. Real books, not the one battered almanac you'd expect to find in a frontier ranch house, but an actual shelf of them worn with use. There was a fire laid and ready in the hearth, which meant someone had laid it that morning, expecting the evening to bring cold. There was a rocking chair near the window, with a blanket draped over it, that had the look of something that got used regularly. And there were drawings on the wall, children's drawings pinned up in a row, horses and mountains, and what appeared to be a very ambitious rendering of a dog. Lillian stopped and looked at them. "The children," Ethan said from the kitchen. "I let them put what they want on the walls. They live here. Some of them. Others come during the week for lessons, go back to their families on weekends. You run a school." He handed her a coffee cup. "I teach what I know. Writing, ranch work, reading when they need it." She looked at the drawings again. The most ambitious one, the dog, had been signed at the bottom in a child's careful letters. "Tommy, age 8. "How long have you been doing this?" she asked. 4 years. She turned to look at him. He was leaning against the kitchen doorframe, coffee in hand, watching her with the same steady attention he'd used on the deputies back on the prairie, not intrusive, just present. "People in town think I run a rough outfit," he said. It wasn't a complaint or an apology, just a statement of fact. "I don't correct them. Easier to let people think what they want." "And what do you want?" she asked. It was a direct question, maybe too direct, but she was too tired for the slow circling of polite conversation. He looked at the drawings on the wall for a moment. "Quiet," he said. "Mostly." Clara came in with the medical kit before Lillian could respond, and the next 20 minutes were occupied with the practical business of cleaning the scrape on her forearm and determining that her shoulder was bruised but not separated. Clara had clearly done this before she worked with efficient, matter-of-fact care, not squeamish about blood, not overly gentle. She was maybe 11 or 12 and moved like someone who had been useful for so long she'd forgotten she was young. "You ride?" Clara asked, working on the scrape. "Yes," Lillian said. "Good. Ethan needs someone who can ride." "I'm not here to be useful to Ethan," Lillian said. Clara looked up at her with those sharp eyes. "Didn't say you were," she said. "Just said it was good you could ride." Ethan from across the room said nothing. Lillian could have sworn he was hiding another almost smile. After the children went to the bunkhouse, she sat across the table from him with a second cup of coffee and the letter she intended to send to the lawyer in Cheyenne. She showed him the letter. She didn't know why exactly, except that he had proven to be someone who processed information without reacting to it, and she needed to think through her position with someone who wouldn't panic. He read it carefully. "This lawyer," he said. "You trust him. He worked with my father for 20 years. Crane will know you've contacted him within a day of the telegraph going out. I know. That means the 30-day window gets smaller. I know that too." She looked at him across the table. "You said Victor Crane ignores people who inconvenience him. But if I send this telegraph and he finds out I'm here, you stop being an inconvenience." "Yes," Ethan said. "And you become a target." "I've been a target before," he said without drama. "This is different. This is Victor Crane with 3,000 acres on the line." He looked at her steadily. "Send the telegraph tomorrow morning," he said. "We'll handle what comes after it." She studied him. "Why?" she asked. "And don't say because there were 3 of them and 1 of me. That was a few hours ago. This is different." He was quiet long enough that she thought he wasn't going to answer. "I had a neighbor," he said finally. Family, 2 sons and a daughter. Crane wanted their water rights. They held out for a year. He set his coffee cup down. They're not here anymore. The words landed quietly and stayed. What happened to them? She asked. Officially, they sold and moved on. He looked at his hands. I helped them move. The daughter was 17. She couldn't stop shaking for the first week. Silence. This is about more than inconveniencing him, Lillian said. Yes, Ethan said. It's personal. It's right, he said, which was not quite the same thing, and she recognized the distinction. Those are sometimes the same thing. She looked at him for a long moment. Outside, the wind had picked up. She could hear it moving through the pines above the ranch, and the temperature had dropped further, the way mountain evenings did, fast and complete. I don't want to pretend, she said. I don't want to play a role or say things I don't mean. I've spent 3 weeks pretending everything was fine, and I'm done with it. I'm not asking you to pretend anything, he said. Your custom, what you said to those riders. Bought us 30 days of legal cover, he said. That's all it was. The town will talk. The town always talks. They'll say, I don't care what they say, he said. Do you? She thought about it honestly. 3 weeks ago, the answer would have been yes, she had a reputation to maintain appearances, to keep the delicate social arithmetic of a young woman alone in unfamiliar territory. But that had been 3 weeks ago, before the lawyer's letter, and the hired riders, and her uncle's signature on documents, declaring her incompetent to manage her own life. No, she said, I don't. Then it doesn't matter. She looked at him one more time, this quiet, certain complicated man, sitting across a kitchen table in a mountain ranch house, with children's drawings on the walls. And she thought, I don't know you at all. I don't know your whole story, and I don't know your real reasons. And I don't know what you carry that you haven't told anyone. But I know what you did today. And that's more than most people have done. She pushed her chair back. I should sleep, she said. Spare rooms at the end of the hall, he said. Door latches from the inside. She started toward the hallway, then stopped. Ethan, she said. He looked up. Thank you, she said. Not warmly, she wasn't ready for warmth, just plainly. For the horse. The corner of his mouth moved. You're welcome, he said. For the horse. She walked down the hall. She heard him bank the fire behind her, heard the familiar sounds of a man putting a house to sleep for the night, the quiet, practiced routine of someone who had been doing this alone for a long time. She latched the door. She sat on the edge of the bed in the dark and let herself feel for one brief, private moment every single thing she had been holding back all day. The fear, the grief for her father, that she still hadn't properly let herself feel the fury at her uncle, the sheer exhausting weight of being a woman in a world that kept trying to make decisions for her. She let it move through her. And then she pressed it back down. Because tomorrow, the telegraph would go out, and after that, this quiet mountain ranch would stop being quiet, and the 30 days would start, and everything would become something she had to fight for, instead of something she could simply live. She lay down in her traveling clothes, too tired to change. She was asleep before the thought finished forming. 50 miles south, in a study lit by expensive lamps, Victor Crane set down the report one of his men had just delivered. He read it twice. Then he set it down and laced his fingers together and looked at nothing for a long moment. Ethan Calloway, he said. The man standing across the desk nodded. She's at his ranch, mountain property, north of Garrison. Crane was quiet. Do you want us to? No, Crane said. Not yet. He unfolded his fingers and picked up the report again. Calloway's smart. If we move directly, he'll be ready for it. He'll have lawyers involved before we can get a man up that mountain. And if she sends a telegraph, she'll send one tomorrow morning, Crane said with the certainty of a man who understood how people thought. She's been running toward a solution, not away from the problem. She'll contact that lawyer in Cheyenne. He paused. By the telegraph operator in Garrison. Already done. Crane looked up. Good. He stood, walked to the window. Calloway thinks he's protecting her. He thinks this is about a woman. He stared out into the dark. It's about 3,000 acres of the richest grazing land in the territory, and I have been waiting to close this deal for 18 months. He let the silence settle. Give him a week, he said. Let him think he's won the first round. Men like Calloway are more dangerous when they feel cornered. Give him space. Let him relax. He turned from the window. And then take everything. The man across the desk nodded and left. Victor Crane stood alone in the expensive, quiet room. Outside, the Wyoming night was clear and cold and enormous. He wasn't angry. Angry was for people who weren't sure they were going to win. He was patient, and patient men in his experience won everything eventually. She woke up to the sound of someone chopping wood. Not the lazy, irregular rhythm of someone doing a chore they'd put off. Fast, clean strokes evenly spaced without wasted motion. The sound of a man who had been doing the same thing the same way for so many years that his body did it without him having to think about it. Lillian lay still for a moment and let herself remember where she was. The spare room, the latched door, the children's drawings in the hallway she'd seen on her way to bed, the mountain ranch belonging to a man she didn't know who had pulled her off the ground and ridden hard into the dark and then sat across a kitchen table from her, talking like someone who had nothing to prove. She got up. Her shoulder screamed at her when she moved and her back added its objections, and she registered both complaints, noted them, and ignored them. She had learned long ago that pain was information, not instruction. It told you what had happened. It didn't get to tell you what to do next. She found her way to the kitchen. The coffee was already made, a full pot, still hot, sitting on the stove, as if she'd been expected. She poured a cup, and she was standing at the window drinking it, when Ethan came back inside from the wood, shedding his coat in the doorway. He saw her and nodded. "Sleep?" he asked. "Some," she said. "You?" "Enough." He poured his own coffee and stood at the other end of the kitchen, and they both drank in silence for a moment. It was not an uncomfortable silence. That was the first thing she noticed, that the quiet between them wasn't charged with the particular awkwardness of two strangers trying to navigate each other. It was just quiet. "I want to send the telegraph this morning," she said. "I know." He set down his cup. "There's a problem." She looked at him. "I rode down to the base station before sunrise," he said. "The line's been cut. Happened sometime in the night." Lillian set her own cup down very carefully. "How fast?" she asked. "Fast enough that they knew where you were going before you got here," he said. "Or they had the line watched and cut it the moment I brought you through." She felt the cold move through her chest. Crane. Had to be. He knew within hours. "He has eyes everywhere in this valley," Ethan said. Not apologetic, just factual. "I knew that going in." "You didn't tell me." "You needed to sleep more than you needed to worry." She looked at him steadily. "Don't do that," she said. "Don't decide what I can handle." He met her eyes, and the apology on his face was not verbal, but it was real. "Understood," he said. She turned to the window. Outside, Clara was moving between the barn and the paddock, moving with the efficiency of a child who had been trusted with real work. The other children weren't visible yet. "The telegraph in Garrison," she said. "Crane will have the operator bought by now. Anything sent from there he reads first." "What about Laramie?" "A day's hard ride." She turned back. "We should go to Laramie." "We could," Ethan said. "Or we could get the word out through a channel Crane doesn't own." She waited. "Margaret Hollis," he said, "runs the general store in Pine Creek. She and her husband used to carry letters between ranchers before the telegraph went in. The informal mail. Crane never bothered with it because it was slow." He paused. "But Thomas Whitfield, that's the lawyer in Cheyenne you mentioned. Thomas Whitfield's sister lives in Pine Creek. Has for 15 years. Lillian stared at him. "You know Thomas Whitfield?" "I know of him," Ethan said carefully. "I know who your father's friends were. Some of them." There it was again, the slight hesitation. The answer that was true, but not complete. She filed it away again. "Pine Creek," she said. 6 miles east. Half an hour. Then we go this morning. He nodded once. Get changed. I'll have the horses ready. She had brought almost nothing when she fled, a single saddlebag with a change of clothes. Her father's papers, the deed to the land, enough money to get her to Cheyenne if everything had gone according to plan. Everything had not gone according to plan. She changed quickly, braided her hair back, and was in the yard before Ethan had finished saddling the second horse. She saw the flicker of something cross his face, surprise, maybe, or approval. And then it was gone. You weren't joking about riding, he said. I never joke about riding, she said, and swung up without using the stirrup block. He mounted beside her and they rode out. The air at that elevation in the early morning was something that hit you before you were ready for it, clean and thin and cold enough to make your eyes water. She hadn't been above the valley since she'd arrived in Wyoming, and the experience of looking out from the mountain as they descended toward Pine Creek was something that went past beautiful into something else she didn't quite have a word for. Immensity, maybe. The feeling that the world was much larger than your problems, which was both comforting and terrifying, depending on the moment. She pushed the feeling aside and focused. Tell me about the frontier right of protection, she said as they rode. All of it, not the version you used to scare 3 hired riders. 30 days, Ethan said. A man who invokes it takes legal responsibility for the woman's safety and well-being. Nobody can compel her to leave his protection without her consent during that period. No law officer, no guardian, nobody. And at the end of 30 days, she's free to go wherever she chooses. Does it require, she chose the word carefully, anything between the two parties? No, he said. It's a protection custom, not a marriage custom. It was designed for exactly this: women fleeing violence or forced arrangements. Most people have forgotten that part of it. But Crane's men believed it. They believed it because I said it like I meant it, Ethan said. And because I'm the man who said it. She looked at him sideways. You're very comfortable with your own reputation. I'm realistic about it, he said. I didn't build it on purpose, but I'm not going to pretend it isn't there when it's useful. She absorbed that. It was the kind of self-awareness she rarely encountered in men of his type, the mountain rancher, the quiet force, the man who didn't explain himself. They typically weren't given to that kind of clear-eyed self-analysis. What did you do, she asked, to get that kind of reputation? He rode without answering long enough that she thought he was going to ignore the question. 3 years ago, he said. Crane sent a crew to run a family called the Hendersons off their land. Night riders, masks, torches. The kind of thing that doesn't leave evidence you can take to a judge. He was quiet for a moment. I found out the night before it was going to happen. I rode to the Henderson property and I waited. Alone? Alone. And they came, 8 men. He paused. They didn't complete the job. She looked at him. He was watching the trail. 8 men, she said. I had better ground, he said simply, as if this explained everything. And I wasn't wearing a mask, so they knew who was telling them to leave. They left. 2 of them needed help onto their horses, he said. The rest left on their own. She turned this over. The Hendersons, are they still on their land? They are. And Crane never retaliated against you directly. He's careful, Ethan said. What he does through lawyers and hired men and the appearance of legal process. Coming directly at me would require him to admit he'd sent night riders, which would expose everything else. So, he just tolerates you. He's waiting, Ethan said. He's been waiting 3 years. Something will shift eventually, and then he'll move. A pause. I suspect you arriving on his doorstep was not what he was waiting for. She almost smiled. I'm not on his doorstep. You're on mine, he said, which is close enough for his purposes. Margaret Hollis was exactly what you'd expect of a woman who had run a general store in a mountain town for 30 years, compact, watchful, and entirely impossible to surprise. She looked at Ethan and Lillian walk through her door together, and her expression didn't shift by so much as a breath. "Ethan," she said. "Margaret." "And this must be the Brooks girl," she said, looking directly at Lillian. Lillian met her eyes. "How do you know who I am?" "Word travels fast in small places," Margaret said, "particularly when the word involves Ethan Calloway invoking the old protection custom in the middle of the open prairie." She came around the counter and looked Lillian over with frank, thorough assessment. "Your father was a good man." Lillian felt the sentence hit her somewhere behind the sternum. "You knew him." "I knew of him. He had a reputation for being straight." Margaret looked at Ethan. "The line's cut, I assume, since before sunrise." She went back behind the counter and pulled out a ledger, flipped through pages with the ease of long familiarity. "Clara Whitfield Thomas's sister is in town until Thursday. She goes back to Cheyenne by stage on Thursday morning." "That's tomorrow," Lillian said. "Which means you'd better write your letter today," Margaret said, "and I'll see it's in Clara's hand tonight." She set the ledger down and looked at Lillian. "Whatever you write it so a judge can read it. Thomas Whitfield knows what to do with the right kind of letter. Get him the deed and your father's will if you have them." "I have both," Lillian said. "The originals." Something shifted in Margaret's expression. Not surprise, relief. "Good," she said. "Victor Crane spent 2 days last week trying to find out where your father kept his records. Seemed very interested in whether there was an original deed or just the copy at the county office." Lillian went very still. "There's a copy at the county office." "Yes," Margaret said. "And the county records office had a fire last month. Very unfortunate." Her tone was flat and precise and left absolutely nothing to interpretation. The county records office had a fire. Lillian looked at Ethan. He was looking at her. And in the fraction of a moment, before either of them spoke, she understood completely suddenly, with the particular sick clarity of someone who has just realized how close they came to losing everything without even knowing it was in danger. Without the original deed, she had nothing. Without the original deed, Crane's forged papers were the only surviving legal record of the land ownership in the county. She had been carrying the only thing standing between Victor Crane and 3,000 acres in her saddlebag, running for her life, not knowing. "He was never after the marriage paperwork," she said. Her voice came out steadier than it had any right to. "The marriage was secondary. He needed me physically in his custody so he could search my belongings." "Yes," Ethan said quietly. "You knew that." A pause. "I suspected it. Last night when you asked how much land, I was working through the logic," he said. "I wasn't certain." She turned back to Margaret. "Write the letter," Margaret said, not unkindly. "Write it now while you're thinking clearly. Anger is a good thing when it's useful. Use it." Lillian sat down at the small writing desk in the corner of the store and she wrote. She wrote for 40 minutes without stopping. The letter to Thomas Whitfield was precise and legal, and used the language her father had taught her, the particular vocabulary of property law and inheritance rights that she'd absorbed over years of watching him conduct his business. She laid out every fact she had. She itemized every step of Crane's maneuvering. She noted the fire at the county records office, the forged guardianship papers, the hired deputies, the cut telegraph line. She listed dates and names and specific legal instruments where she knew them, and at the end she wrote, "I am in possession of the original deed, and my father's original will, both in his hand, both witnessed and notarized. I will hold them personally until I can deliver them to your custody or that of a federal judge. Please move as quickly as you are able." She sealed it with wax from Margaret's desk. She handed it to Margaret. Margaret looked at it, then at Lillian. "Your father would be proud," she said. Lillian didn't answer that. She couldn't. They were halfway back to the ranch, moving at a steady trot, when Ethan said, "We need to talk about the next 30 days. "I know," she said. "Crane will move. Not directly, not his way. He'll use pressure, legal challenges to the protection custom, attempts to get a county judge to supersede it. possibly trying to get your uncle to make a formal complaint. My uncle will do whatever Crane tells him, she said. He's terrified of the man. Then Crane will use him. He paused. He'll also try to isolate you, make it harder for you to communicate with anyone outside the ranch. He'll move to discredit you, start rumors that you're not in your right mind or that the arrangement at my ranch is something it isn't. Something it isn't, she repeated. Yes. She was quiet for a moment. What if we gave him something to work with, she said. Something that looks like exactly what he wants people to think it is, but actually strengthens our position legally. Ethan looked at her. If we make the engagement formal, she said, working through it as she spoke. Not real an arrangement, both of us understanding exactly what it is, but publicly, legally documented. Then Crane can't use the guardianship argument at all. A woman with a formal engagement is legally considered to be transitioning to a new household. My uncle's guardianship papers become invalid. The silence stretched. You've thought about this before, Ethan said. I'm thinking about it right now, she said. But I need to know if you're willing. He looked ahead. His jaw tightened slightly, not with reluctance, she thought, but with the expression of a man running the same calculation she was running and finding the numbers weren't wrong. It would have to be publicly documented, he said. Yes. Crane will immediately try to find grounds to challenge it. He'll look for grounds, she said. He won't find them if we do it correctly. If the arrangement holds for 30 days, Ethan said slowly, and your lawyer in Cheyenne moves fast enough to get a federal judge involved. Crane has nowhere to stand, she said. The land is mine, the guardianship is void, and there's no legal mechanism left for him to use. She met his eyes. 30 days. That's all I need. Ethan rode without speaking for a long enough moment that she felt the weight of what she'd just proposed settle properly. She wasn't frightened of it. She had thought of it, worked through its logic, offered it with clear eyes. But she was aware that she had just asked something significant of a man who didn't know her and owed her nothing. There would be talk, he said. You said you didn't care about talk. I don't. But you'd have to live with it, even after it ended. I've been living with Victor Crane trying to force me into a real marriage, she said. I can survive people talking about a fake engagement. He turned to look at her, then a full direct look, the kind he hadn't quite given her before. 30 days, he said. A formal arrangement. Nothing more. Nothing more, she agreed. He nodded once with the same decisive finality he'd used when turning his horse on the prairie. We'll go to Justice Reeves this afternoon, he said. He's in Pine Creek. He's not owned by Crane. You're certain? Margaret would have mentioned it if he was. The corner of his mouth shifted. She mentions everything. Justice Reeves was a small, meticulous man in his 60s, who had been performing legal documentation in Pine Creek for 22 years, and had developed in that time the particular immunity to surprise that only comes from having witnessed every permutation of human decision-making. He looked at Ethan and Lillian across his desk without expression. Formal letter of intent, Ethan said. Witnessed and filed. Reeves looked at Lillian. Miss Brooks, this is voluntary. Entirely, she said. No coercion, no arrangement made under duress or constraint. She thought about the irony of that question, that she was filing this document specifically because another man's coercion had made it necessary, and kept her face neutral. None. Very well. He opened his ledger and began writing. He wrote the document in his careful, practiced hand, and when it was done, he read it back to them, the formal language of a frontier engagement agreement. Both parties entering voluntarily. Both parties acknowledged legally competent to enter the agreement. The arrangement dated and filed and witnessed by himself as the sitting justice in Pine Creek. He looked up. You both understand that this document, once filed, carries legal weight. It will need to be formally dissolved, if not proceeded with. We understand, Ethan said. Reeves looked at Lillian one more time. She met his eyes steadily. He filed the document. On the ride back to the ranch, Lillian felt something strange move through her. Not relief exactly, and not fear. Something in between. The particular feeling of a decision made and committed to the moment after you've jumped and before you've landed. She looked over at Ethan. He was writing with the same expression he always wore, composed, watchful, already on to the next calculation. "Thank you," she said, "for doing that." "It's the logical move," he said. "It's still a cost to you." He looked at her briefly. "I've paid higher ones," he said, and something in his voice was quieter than usual. She wanted to ask. She didn't. Not yet. What happened next happened fast. The news of the formal engagement reached Victor Crane before sunset. She knew this the same way she was coming to know most things about Crane's operations through Margaret Hollis, who had informants the way other people had furniture everywhere and taken entirely for granted. The writer who came to the ranch the following morning was not armed. He was a lawyer. Lillian watched from the porch as Ethan stepped out to meet him. The lawyer's name was Hatch. She learned it later, and he was a careful, thin-faced man who kept his hands very still and chose his words with the precision of someone who charged by the sentence. He handed Ethan an envelope. He said something she couldn't hear. Ethan read whatever was in the envelope without changing expression, then handed it back. He said 3 words. She couldn't hear those either. The lawyer nodded, remounted, and rode away. Ethan came back to the porch. "What was it?" she asked. He handed her the envelope. She opened it and read. It was a formal legal challenge to the engagement filing citing a Wyoming Territory provision. She had never heard of a clause attached to the Frontier Protection Custom that allowed a legal guardian to contest a protective arrangement if the guardian could prove the woman had entered it under misinformation or without understanding its implications. Crane's lawyer was arguing that Lillian, having been under emotional duress following her flight, could not have entered the agreement with full competence. It was elegant. It was targeted. And if it worked, it dissolved both the engagement documentation and the protection custom simultaneously. She looked up at Ethan. "He's fast," she said. "I told you." Ethan looked at the document over her shoulder. 3 days to get this filed. He had it drafted before I sent you to bed the first night." He anticipated this move. He anticipated we'd make a legal move. He had arguments drafted against every option. Ethan straightened. "He's going to request a hearing before the county judge, probably within a week." "And the county judge?" "Is the judge in Millerton," Ethan said. "Yes." She lowered the document. For a moment, neither of them spoke. "Who do we have?" she asked. "Honestly, who do we have and who does he have?" He leaned against the porch rail and crossed his arms and gave her the honest answer she'd asked for. "He has the county judge, the county assessor, the telegraph operator in Garrison, and at least 3 deputies," he said. "He has a legal team, and he has money, and he has time on his side. Every week this goes on costs you more than it costs him. And us. We have Margaret. We have Justice Reeves. We have Thomas Whitfield in Cheyenne, who may or may not get your letter in time. We have the original deed and the will." He paused. "And we have one other thing." "What?" "We're right," he said. "Which doesn't always count for much in law, but it counts for something when you get in front of the right judge." She thought for a moment. "We need to get in front of the right judge before the county hearing." "Yes." "How?" "That's what I've been thinking about all morning," he said. From inside the house she heard Clara's voice, that decisive 11-year-old voice that had been running the kitchen since Lillian arrived, as if she'd been born to it, calling them in for breakfast. Ethan pushed off the rail. "Come eat," he said. "We'll think better on full stomachs." She followed him inside. At the table, the 4 children arranged themselves with the ease of long habit. Tommy and the 2 younger ones on one side, Clara across from them. There was a place set for Lillian that hadn't been there the morning before. Clara had done that, she noted. Not asked, just done. "You look worried," Clara said, looking at Lillian. "I'm thinking," Lillian said. "Is it bad thinking or good thinking?" "It's necessary thinking." Clara seemed to accept this. She passed the bread without further comment, which Lillian found herself grateful for. She watched Ethan with the children during breakfast. It was not what she expected. She had braced herself for performance, for the slightly stiff kindness of a man who knew he was being observed. But he wasn't performing. He listened to the youngest boy talk about the horse he'd been practicing on, with the same complete attention he gave everything, and when the boy said something that was worth saying, Ethan responded to it like it was worth responding to. Clara caught Lillian watching. "He does that with everyone," Clara said quietly. "Listens like you're the only person who ever said anything important." Lillian looked back down at her plate. She had noticed. After breakfast, Ethan asked the older two children to take the younger ones to the south paddock for riding practice, and when the kitchen cleared, he spread a map across the table, hand-drawn, detailed, and put his finger on a point north of Pine Creek. "The Weston family," he said. "Old ranching family. 3 generations in this valley. The Weston patriarch Edmund Weston was one of the original land grant recipients in this territory. He has a personal relationship with the federal circuit judge in Laramie." Lillian looked at the map. "You want to go through Weston. If Edmund Weston sends a personal letter to Judge Harlan in Laramie requesting that the circuit court take jurisdiction over the land dispute before the county hearing, Crane's challenge becomes procedurally moot. Federal jurisdiction supersedes county court." She looked up. "Can you get to Edmund Weston?" "He doesn't like me much," Ethan said. "Why not?" "He thinks I'm reckless." "A beat." "He's probably right." "But will he hear you out?" Ethan was quiet for a moment. Then, "He'll hear you out." She looked at him. "He knew your father," Ethan said. "They were land-grant neighbors 30 years ago, before your father moved his operation south." He met her eyes. "If you ride up to Edmund Weston's door with your father's deed and your father's name, he'll listen." She felt the weight of it. Her father's name doing what it had always done, opening doors and carrying trust, and being more useful in death than many men were in life. "When do we go?" she said. "Tomorrow morning," Ethan said. "Early." He started to roll up the map and then stopped, because through the kitchen window they both saw it at the same time. A rider, approaching fast from the south. Not a lawyer this time. Not a careful, thin-faced man with an envelope. This was a man riding hard the way you ride when the message you're carrying cannot wait. Ethan was outside before Lillian had pushed her chair back. She followed him to the yard. The rider pulled up in a spray of dust. He was young, maybe 20, with the look of someone who had been riding since before sunup. He looked at Ethan, then at Lillian, and then at Ethan again. "Message from Margaret Hollis," he said, catching his breath. "She said to come straight up and not stop." "What is it?" Ethan said. "Your man Whitfield in Cheyenne." The rider was still breathing hard. "Margaret's contact got word through last night before the stage even left. He's already moving." He looked at Lillian. "He says he has something about your father's land records and a survey done 3 years ago that Victor Crane tried to have buried. He says if you can get him the original deed, he thinks he can have you in front of a federal judge in 10 days. 10 days. Lillian stood in the yard in the Wyoming morning and felt something shift under her that she hadn't felt in 3 weeks. Not safety. She was too careful to call it that. But something like ground. Something that felt for the first time like ground. She looked at Ethan. He looked back at her, and for a moment the mask of composed, forward-looking competence slipped just enough to show what was underneath. He was relieved. 10 days, he said. "Is that enough?" she asked. He turned to look south, the direction Victor Crane's lawyer had ridden that morning. "It's going to have to be," he said. 10 days sounded like enough until you started counting them. The first day went to Edmund Weston. Ethan had been right that Weston wouldn't ride to meet him halfway. The old patriarch of the Weston family had made his position on Ethan Calloway clear years ago. Too fast, too willing to put himself in front of other men's bullets, not the kind of steady influence a valley needed in its ranking ranchers. Edmund Weston believed in law and process, and the slow grinding machinery of legitimate power. He had tolerated Ethan the way you tolerate a fast-moving river, aware of its force, unwilling to stand in it directly. But Lillian was a different question entirely. She rode up to the Weston property beside Ethan in the early morning, and when Edmund Weston came out to the porch and saw her face, really saw it, the way an old man looks at a young woman and recognizes something. From a long time ago, he stopped moving. "You have your father's eyes," he said. "I know," she said. "He used to say, that was the one thing he gave me that couldn't be taken away." Weston looked at her for a long moment. Then he looked at Ethan with the expression of a man who has just recalculated something significant. "Come inside," he said. She told Edmund Weston everything. Not the compressed, strategic version she'd given to Margaret Hollis, or the legal precision of the letter to Thomas Whitfield, everything. The night her father died. The uncle, who had been waiting with documents already prepared. Victor Crane's first visit, the way he had smiled while explaining that the marriage was the simplest solution for everyone involved. The lawyer's letter, the hired deputies, the fire at the county records office. She put the original deed on Edmund Weston's table. She put her father's will beside it. She watched the old man read both documents with the careful attention of someone who had spent a lifetime understanding exactly what paper meant in a world where paper was the difference between owning something and losing it. When he finished, he set both documents down and folded his hands on top of them. "James Brooks was the most honest man I ever did business with," he said. "In 40 years in this valley, I never once had cause to doubt his word." He looked at Lillian. "He talked about you. Toward the end. He knew he was sick before most people did." A pause. "He said you were the one thing he'd done in his life that didn't need fixing." She kept her face completely still. She was getting very good at that. "I'll write the letter," Edmund Weston said. "I'll send it by private rider to Judge Harlan in Laramie today. By my hand, not the telegraph." He looked at Ethan. "This doesn't mean I've changed my opinion of you, Calloway." "I don't need your opinion," Ethan said. "I need your letter." Weston almost smiled. "At least you're honest about it." They rode back to the ranch with the letter dispatched and 9 days remaining, and something that felt dangerously close to momentum. The second day brought the first real attack. Not gunmen, not lawyers. Something more precise and more damaging than either. Margaret sent word by mid-morning, the story spreading through Pine Creek and into the valley beyond, was that Lillian Brooks had willingly entered into an arrangement with Ethan Calloway of her own mercenary design, that she had run not from Victor Crane, but toward Calloway's land and money, that the engagement was her scheme to secure a wealthy rancher while avoiding her legal obligations to her guardian, that she was not a woman in danger, but a woman playing dangerous men against each other for personal gain. It was surgical. Lillian saw that immediately. Crane couldn't attack the legal documents directly without exposing himself, so he attacked her credibility instead. A woman no one trusted was a woman no judge would prioritize. She was sitting at the kitchen table with the message from Margaret when Ethan came in from the paddock. She handed it to him without speaking. He read it. His jaw tightened, the only outward sign. "Who's spreading it?" he asked. "Margaret thinks it started at the saloon in Pine Creek. Crane has men who know how to start a story and let other people carry it." "It'll reach the county judge before the week's out," Ethan said. "It's designed to." She looked at him. "He's not wrong that it will work. A woman with a reputation for scheming doesn't get a sympathetic hearing. We need someone who's already seen through Crane before," Ethan said. He set the message down. "Hannah Pierce." "Who is she?" "She was Victor Crane's bookkeeper for 6 years, left 2 years ago, moved to a small place east of town." He paused. "She left because she found things in the books she couldn't make herself ignore." Lillian looked at him sharply. "She has records. I don't know what she has," he said. "I know she left, and I know she didn't go to Crane for a reference, which means whatever she found cost her the security of a 6-year position." He met her eyes. People who sacrifice that kind of security are generally not doing it for no reason. "You've never spoken to her?" "No. She's stayed away from everything connected to Crane, including me." He said it without self-pity, just fact. "She'll trust you before she trusts me." Lillian absorbed that. It was the second time he had sent her forward while he stayed back to Weston to wherever Hannah Pierce lived. She wasn't sure whether this was strategy or something else. "Do you ever let anyone fight your battles?" she asked. He looked at her. "When they're better positioned to win them," he said. She couldn't argue with that logic. She didn't like it, but she couldn't argue with it. Hannah Pierce opened her door and looked at Lillian with the expression of a woman who had been waiting for something to arrive and wasn't entirely surprised that it had. She was in her 40s, steady-eyed, careful in the way of someone who had unlearned carelessness through hard experience. She looked at Lillian for a long moment, then stepped back from the door. "Come in," she said. She didn't offer pleasantries. She sat across from Lillian at a plain table and said, "You're the Brooks girl, James Brooks's daughter." "Yes." "Your father bought feed from a supplier I managed accounts for. He always paid on time and never argued the invoice." She said it like this was a meaningful character assessment, which in her world it probably was. "What do you need?" Lillian told her. Hannah Pierce listened without interrupting. When Lillian finished, Hannah sat quietly for a moment. "What I have," she said slowly, "is not a weapon. It's not something I can walk into a courtroom with and wave around. It's ledger knowledge patterns. I noticed numbers that didn't add up the way they should have, transactions recorded under names that I eventually understood were not real names." "Shell companies," Lillian said. Hannah looked at her with something like respect. "You know the term." "My father taught me to read a balance sheet before I could read a novel." Hannah nodded. "There were payments, significant payments, to a county official, recorded as consulting fees. I know which county official." She paused. "I also know that 3 years ago Victor Crane commissioned a private land survey of the valley. The surveyor's report went to Crane directly, not to the county. That report disappeared." She looked at Lillian steadily. "Your lawyer in Cheyenne mentioned a survey. He said Crane tried to have it buried." "It wasn't buried," Hannah said. "I kept a copy of the invoice, and I kept the surveyor's name." Silence. "Will you testify?" Lillian asked. Hannah was quiet for a long time, long enough that Lillian did not push. She recognized the quality of this particular silence. It was not reluctance born of cowardice. It was the silence of someone calculating what they could survive. "If you can get me in front of a federal judge," Hannah said finally, "rather than the county court, yes, I'll testify." She met Lillian's eyes. "But only federal. Victor Crane owns the county." "We know," Lillian said. Hannah looked at her hands, then back up. "Your father would have done the same thing," she said. "Put himself between a person and someone trying to take what wasn't theirs." A pause. "I used to wonder if anyone would ever give me the same chance." Lillian reached across the table and put the letter she'd been carrying, the message from Thomas Whitfield, the one that had arrived by Margaret's informal network, in front of Hannah Pierce. "A federal judge," she said. 10 days, possibly less." Hannah read the letter. She folded it. She handed it back. "I'll be ready," she said. 7 days and Victor Crane stopped being patient. The first sign was the cattle. 40 head of Ethan's cattle from the north pasture were found the following morning, spread across 3 separate areas of the mountain range. Gates opened, fences cut in 2 places. Not stolen, just scattered. A message that said, "Your operation is exposed. Your fences mean nothing. We can reach anything you think is protected." Ethan's ranch hands spent the better part of the day gathering cattle. 2 of the 3 hands Ethan employed were young men who had worked for him for years and understood what the scattered cattle meant without being told. They went about the work without complaint, but Lillian watched their faces and understood what she saw there. This was escalating. She found Ethan at the fence line late in the afternoon, examining where it had been cut. "Clean cuts," he said, crouching down. "This isn't opportunistic. Someone knew the fence pattern. Someone who had time to scout your property." "Yes." He stood. "They were up here before you arrived. This was being planned before I brought you to the ranch." That landed wrong. They were watching you before I came here. Crane watches everyone who opposes him. I've known that for years. He looked at her. Don't. Don't what? Think this is your fault. She pressed her lips together. She had been thinking exactly that. It accelerated the timeline, she said. My being here made you a more immediate target. You being here means he moves now instead of waiting for the right moment, Ethan said. Which means he moves before he's completely ready. That's better for us, not worse. She looked at him. You're very good at framing bad things as advantages. I've had practice, he said, and picked up a section of cut fence wire. What he didn't say, and what she understood without it being said, was that the scattered cattle was a warning. The next move would not be a warning. She was right. It was Clara who saw them first. She came running into the house at a dead run, not the purposeful efficiency Clara usually moved with, but genuine full-bodied alarm, and she hit the kitchen doorframe and said, "Riders, South Road, a lot of them." Ethan was already moving. Lillian was 2 steps behind him. From the front of the house, she could see them coming. Not Crane's usual hired deputies. More. 8 men, maybe 10, all armed, moving at a deliberate pace that was worse than a gallop because it said they weren't in a hurry. They had all the time they needed. They knew it. And at the front of the column, riding a gray horse that she recognized from the day he had come to her father's house with his lawyer, and his careful smile, was Victor Crane himself. She had not seen him since before her father died. He looked exactly the same. Well-dressed for a man riding in the mountains, composed, carrying himself with the particular ease of someone who had never once in his adult life been in a situation he didn't believe he could control. Beside him on a sorrel horse, looking at anything except Lillian, was her uncle. She felt the sick drop of it in her stomach. Not because she was surprised, because seeing it confirmed the actual physical sight of her father's brother riding beside the man who was trying to steal everything her father had built was a different thing from knowing it abstractly. She made herself stand still. She made herself breathe. Ethan stepped off the porch. He walked to the middle of the yard and stopped there. He didn't put his hand near his gun. He didn't cross his arms or shift his weight. He just stood. Clara appeared beside Lillian. "Go to the bunkhouse," Lillian said quietly. "Take the children. Lock the door." "I want to—" "Clara." Lillian looked at her. "Please." Clara went. Victor Crane pulled his horse to a stop 20 feet from where Ethan was standing. He looked at Ethan with the expression of a man who has bought a complicated piece of equipment and is determining whether it can be fixed or needs to be replaced. "Calloway," he said, "I'm going to be straightforward with you because I think you're a man who prefers straight talk." "I prefer you to turn around," Ethan said. Crane smiled. It was a real smile. There was genuine amusement in it. "I appreciate the sentiment, but I have legal documents signed by a county judge affirming guardianship transfer and ordering the return of Lillian Brooks to her uncle's custody." He reached into his coat and produced an envelope. "This has been done through proper legal channels. If you obstruct the execution of this order, you will be obstructing the law. That order was issued by a judge you own," Ethan said, "in a jurisdiction that doesn't have authority over a federal land dispute." Crane's smile stayed exactly where it was. "An interesting argument. Save it for the county court hearing next week. The federal circuit will hear the case before your county hearing takes place," Ethan said. For the first time, something shifted in Crane's composure. Not much a fraction, but it was there. "On whose petition?" he said. "Edmund Weston's?" Ethan said. "Filed 4 days ago." Crane was quiet for 2 full seconds. 2 seconds was a long time for Victor Crane. "Edmund Weston doesn't involve himself in other people's legal matters," Crane said. "He does when they involve James Brooks's daughter," Ethan said, "and his personal relationship with Judge Harlan in Laramie." Crane absorbed this. His horse shifted under him, and he steadied it with a small movement of his hand. Lillian walked off the porch. She hadn't planned it. She didn't stop to think it through or calculate it. She simply found herself moving, crossing the yard to stand beside Ethan because it was where she needed to be. Crane looked at her. Something happened in his face. She wouldn't call it respect, but it was a recognition. He was reassessing. "Miss Brooks," he said, "I want you to understand that my intentions toward your welfare have always been—" "Mr. Crane," she said. "Stop." He stopped. "I know about the fire at the county records office," she said. "I know about the private survey commissioned 3 years ago. I know about the shell company payments to a county official whose name I am currently not going to say out loud, but which Thomas Whitfield in Cheyenne has had in his possession for the past 4 days." She watched Crane's face. "I also know that you had my uncle sign guardianship papers 3 weeks before my father died. Not after. Before." The yard went very quiet. Her uncle made a sound, a small, involuntary sound somewhere between a word and something that never quite made it to speech. Crane's expression had gone completely still. "That's a serious accusation," he said. "It's a documented fact," she said. "The notarization date is on the papers. My father's death certificate has a date on it. A 6-year-old can subtract." One of the hired men shifted in his saddle. Another looked at Crane. "The lady made her choice," Ethan said. She felt him move beside her, not in front, not pulling her back. Just beside. Even. "Anyone who reaches for her," he said, "answers to me." The silence that followed was the specific kind of silence that happens when armed men are doing the same calculation simultaneously and arriving at the same answer. The man with the gun in the middle of his own yard, who has nothing to lose, is a different proposition entirely from a man with a gun on a horse who has a paycheck to consider. The 2 men at the back of Crane's column exchanged a look. Crane saw it. "Stand your ground," he said without turning around. Nobody moved. "You're holding a legal order," Crane said to Ethan, steady again now. "If you defy it, there will be consequences." "There will also be consequences," Ethan said, "if what's in that order becomes part of the federal court record, which it will, along with the date of the notarization, and the date of James Brooks's death, and your surveyor's name, and the ledger entries from your former bookkeeper." Now Crane went completely still. "She's willing to testify," Lillian said, "under oath, in federal court." The transformation in Victor Crane's face was not dramatic. It didn't need to be. It was the subtle shift of a very confident man encountering something he had not anticipated and could not immediately neutralize. Not panic, nothing so vulnerable as that. Just a very precise recalibration. The slow understanding that the hand he'd thought he was holding was not entirely the hand in front of him. He looked at Lillian for a long moment. "You're your father's daughter," he said. His voice was perfectly even. "I know," she said. He looked at Ethan. Something passed between them, the wordless acknowledgement of 2 people who have fully understood each other's positions and know that this particular moment is not the ending. Crane pulled his horse around. "We'll settle this properly," he said. "In court." "We will," Ethan said. Crane and his column of riders turned and rode back down the south road. Her uncle went with them without looking at her. She watched them go, and she didn't let herself feel anything about that until they were out of sight. Then she let out a breath that she had been holding for what felt like the entirety of the last 3 minutes. Ethan turned to look at her. "The notarization date," he said. "Was a guess," she admitted. "I didn't actually know when he had those papers prepared." He looked at her. "I knew it was possible," she said. "My father was sick for months. Crane would have needed time to prepare. It was logical." She met his eyes. "But I didn't have the papers in front of me." He was quiet for a moment. "It wasn't a guess," he said. "You knew he'd have done it early. You knew him well enough to know how he operates." He paused. Was his face worth it? She thought of the shift in Victor Crane's expression, that fraction of a second where the control had slipped. "Yes," she said. He almost smiled. "Good," he said. But it wasn't over. She had known it wouldn't be. Crane had ridden away too composed, too controlled. A man like that didn't lose a confrontation and simply absorb it. He reassessed, he regrouped, and he came back through a door you hadn't noticed was open. The door he used was her uncle. He came alone, which surprised her. The following morning, before Ethan was back from the north pasture check, a single rider appeared on the south road, moving at a slow walk, the pace of someone who is either very tired or very reluctant, or both. Her uncle dismounted at the edge of the yard and looked at the house and didn't move. Lillian stood on the porch and looked at him. He was her father's brother. He had the same jaw, the same set of the shoulders, the same way of standing that made you think of someone who had once been taller and had slowly compressed under the weight of choices made over decades. He was not a bad man, the way Victor Crane was bad. He wasn't cold or calculating or driven by the particular ruthless clarity that made Crane effective. He was a frightened man who had borrowed money he couldn't repay and made a deal that had grown beyond anything he'd anticipated. She knew all of this. It didn't change anything. But she knew it. "Lillian," he said. "Uncle Robert," she said. He looked at his hands. "I need you to understand." "I understand," she said. "I understood a long time ago." He looked up at her. "Victor Crane is not a man who loses gracefully." "I know. What you said yesterday about the papers." He stopped. "He knows you were guessing. He had his lawyer go through the notarization records this morning. The date on those papers is 2 days after your father died." She absorbed that. "So I was wrong," she said. "About the date, yes." He looked at her steadily. "But it shook him. Whatever you thought you knew, it shook him. And that means there's something else there that you don't know about yet." He paused. "I don't know what it is. He doesn't tell me things. He tells me where to sign and when to show up." She came down off the porch and stood in the yard in front of him. "Why are you here?" she asked. He met her eyes. Her father's eyes in a different face, older and more defeated. "Because I was his brother," he said. "And I let him down. And I can't fix that." His voice didn't break, it just went very quiet. "But I can tell you that Crane sent a rider to Laramie yesterday. Private messenger. I don't know who he went to see, but it wasn't Judge Harlan." "Then who?" "I don't know," he said. "I'm telling you what I saw. The rest?" He stopped. "The rest is up to you." He remounted. He looked at her from the saddle for a moment. "Your father used to say you were the one thing he'd done right," he said. It came out rough, like something dragged up from a long way down. "I thought he was just being sentimental." He turned his horse. He wasn't. She watched him ride away. When Ethan came back from the north pasture, he found her standing in the middle of the yard with the look of someone who has just received a piece of information and is currently taking it apart. "What happened?" he said, swinging down. She told him. He listened without interrupting. When she finished, he stood with his hand on his horse's neck, thinking. "A private rider to Laramie," he said. "Not to the county judge, not to his own lawyer." He looked at her. "Someone in Laramie that Crane thinks can interfere with the federal hearing." "Or someone who can tell him what Edmund Weston's letter said," she said. "If he has a contact inside the circuit court, then he knows exactly what evidence we have," Ethan finished. "And he knows what we don't have." She felt the shift under her again, that sensation of ground that had been solid 2 days ago becoming less certain. "The surveyor," she said. "Hannah Pierce has the invoice and the name, but we don't have the actual survey report." "No. If Crane knows that, he'll know our case has a gap," Ethan said. They stood in the yard. The mountain around them was doing what mountains always do, which is nothing remaining exactly as it was, regardless of what happened at its feet. She had found that quality either maddening or steadying, depending on the day, and today she was not yet sure which it was. "The surveyor?" she said. "Do you know where he is?" Ethan looked at her. "I know where he was 3 years ago," he said. "Small outfit east side of the valley. If he's still there, Is he the kind of man who buries things, or the kind of man who keeps them? She asked. Ethan thought. He's the kind of man who did a job he was paid to do, and then discovered he didn't like what the job was used for. He never came forward because no one ever asked him directly. She straightened. Then we ask him directly, she said. Ethan nodded once. At first light, he said. She turned to go back inside, and then she stopped, because Ethan had made a sound, not a word, just a sharp intake of breath, and when she turned back, he was looking at something in his hand. He had picked it up from the ground near where her uncle had been standing. A small piece of paper folded twice the kind of note passed quickly and without ceremony. He opened it. He read it. His face went very still. She crossed the yard to him. He handed her the paper. She read it. It was 4 words written in a hand she didn't recognize. He has the report. She read it twice. She looked up at Ethan. The surveyor, she said. Already has it, he said, which means someone told him to hold it. He looked at the note. Or someone told him we were coming. She looked at the note again. 4 words. No signature. Left on the ground by a man who had ridden away without looking back. Her uncle, who had told her Victor Crane sent a private rider to Laramie, who had told her there was something she didn't know about yet, who had borrowed money and made a deal and signed papers and spent months being told where to stand and when to show up, and who had, when it mattered, when the one moment that could not be retrieved was passing, dropped a piece of paper in the dirt and ridden away without explaining it. She folded the note carefully and put it in her pocket. He was helping us, she said. Yes, Ethan said quietly. Even now. Especially now, Ethan said, when it costs him something. She pressed her hand flat against the note through the fabric of her pocket. First light, she said. First light, he agreed. The surveyor's name was Daniel Pratt, and he lived exactly where Ethan remembered a modest spread on the east side of the valley, the kind of operation that wasn't trying to grow into anything larger than it already was. A man who had made his calculations and decided that smaller and honest suited him better than larger and complicated. He opened his door before they reached the porch. He had been expecting someone. That was immediately clear. Not necessarily them, but someone. He had the look of a man who had been sleeping lightly for a long time and had recently stopped pretending otherwise. He was in his 50s, compact and weathered with the careful eyes of a man who spent his professional life measuring things exactly. He looked at Ethan, then at Lillian, then back at Ethan. Calloway, he said. Pratt, Ethan said. This is Lillian Brooks, James Brooks's daughter. Something moved through Daniel Pratt's face. Not guilt exactly, something older and more settled than guilt. The expression of a man who has been carrying a thing for long enough that he's made a kind of uneasy peace with the weight of it. And then someone arrives at his door, and the peace becomes impossible. I know who she is, he said. He stepped back from the door. Come in. He had coffee ready. That told her what she needed to know. Before he said a word, he had been waiting, and the waiting had been deliberate. He poured 3 cups and sat down and put his hands flat on the table. The survey, he said. That's why you're here. Yes, Lillian said. I did it 3 years ago, he said. Victor Crane commissioned it. Private contract, significant money, specific instructions. The results went to him alone, not filed with the county. He looked at his hands. I do a lot of private surveys. That's not unusual. Ranchers commission them when they want to know what they own before they decide whether to file publicly. But this one was different, Lillian said. This one... He stopped. He picked up his coffee cup, set it back down without drinking. The survey covered your father's land, the 3,000 acres in the valley. Crane had me do a complete resource assessment, water rights, grazing capacity, mineral deposits. He paused. The mineral deposits. Lillian went still. Ethan leaned forward slightly. What did you find? Ethan asked. Coal, Daniel Pratt said. Significant deposits. Deep seam running under approximately 400 acres of the eastern portion of your father's land. He looked at Lillian directly. At current market rates, conservative estimate that land is worth 8 to 10 times what anyone has been pricing it at for grazing value alone. The silence that followed was the kind that changes the shape of a room. Lillian set her cup down. "He wasn't after the grazing land," she said. "No," Pratt said. "The grazing land was the mechanism. The coal was the purpose." She looked at Ethan. He was looking at her with the expression of a man who has just watched a puzzle resolve into a picture he didn't expect and is rapidly adjusting to it. "The forced marriage," she said, working through it aloud. "The guardianship papers. The fire at the county records office. None of that was about 3,000 acres of pasture." She felt the cold clarity of it moving through her. He needed the mineral rights. A wife's property transfers entirely to her husband under territorial law. A ward's estate is managed by the guardian. Either way. "He controls the coal," Ethan said. "The county records fire destroyed the official copy of the deed," Lillian continued. "If he'd gotten the original from my saddlebag, he'd have had the only surviving documentation of what the land contained," Pratt said. "And he'd have buried the survey results, filed a new deed under his own name. By the time anyone questioned it, the coal extraction would already be underway, and the legal fight would have taken years." Lillian looked at Daniel Pratt. "You kept the survey." "I kept my copy," he said. "The original went to Crane. My working copy stayed in my files." He pressed his lips together. "I told myself it was standard practice. You keep your working documents." He looked down at the table. "I told myself that for 3 years. "Why didn't you come forward?" she asked. Not accusatory, she genuinely wanted to understand. "Because I had no one to come forward to," he said. "The county judge is Crane's. The county assessor is Crane's. The men with badges in this valley." He shook his head. "I would have handed the survey directly to Victor Crane and been ruined for the trouble." He looked at her. "I needed someone who could do something with it. Someone with standing in a court that Crane doesn't own." "Thomas Whitfield," she said. "In Cheyenne." "Yes, I heard he was involved." He reached under the table and produced a leather folder, thick worn at the edges, the kind that gets handled regularly. "I've had this ready for 2 weeks." He put it on the table and pushed it toward her. She opened it. Inside was the survey complete, detailed, professionally rendered bearing Daniel Pratt's signature and the date 3 years prior. Resource maps. Depth calculations, projected yield estimates, and on the final page, a notation in Pratt's careful hand, commissioned by V. Crane. Client instructed no county filing. This copy retained per standard professional practice. She looked up at him. "This is your testimony," she said. "This is my testimony," he agreed. "I'll appear in person. Federal court only. I made that decision the same night I heard Edmund Weston had written to Judge Harlan." He looked at her steadily. "I'm sorry it took someone coming to my door. I'm sorry I waited for someone else to make the first move." She thought about what she wanted to say to that. Several things came to mind. Honest things about the cost of waiting, about what 3 years of knowing and staying quiet had meant for her father's estate for her own 3 weeks of running. She considered all of them and set them aside. "You're making the move now," she said. It was not forgiveness. But it was not condemnation either. It was just the truth of where they were. He nodded, and something in his face eased slightly. Ethan picked up the leather folder and stood. "We need to move," he said. "This goes to Whitfield today." Getting it to Whitfield meant Pine Creek first. Margaret Hollis and her network of informal channels that had quietly outlasted every attempt by Victor Crane to control information in the valley. Margaret took the folder, looked at the survey, said nothing for a long moment, and then looked at Lillian. "Coal," she said. "Yes. That explains a great deal." She closed the folder. "I know a man who rides to Cheyenne twice a week for a merchant in Garrison. He leaves this afternoon. Reliable, discreet, and not owned by anyone." She looked at Ethan. "He'll have it to Whitfield by tomorrow morning." "We need Whitfield to have it before Crane's contact in Laramie can move," Ethan said. "Then we're close. Margaret said. Very close. She sent the rider with 2 copies, one for Whitfield, one sealed separately, and addressed directly to Judge Harlan's clerk in Laramie. Her idea, not theirs. Margaret Hollis had been managing information in a valley owned by a powerful man for 30 years, and she had developed the instinct for redundancy that came from watching single points of failure collapse at the worst moments. Riding back to the ranch, Lillian felt the exhaustion of the past 10 days settle into her in a wave she couldn't push back entirely. Not defeat the opposite. The exhaustion that comes when the thing you've been fighting toward is finally within reach and your body decides it's safe to feel what it's been carrying. She didn't say anything for a long stretch of the ride. Ethan didn't push. That was something she had noticed about him, the way he understood the difference between silence that needed breaking and silence that needed leaving alone. Most people couldn't tell the difference. They filled quiet with words because quiet made them uncomfortable. Ethan seemed to have no particular discomfort with quiet at all, which meant that when he did speak, she listened differently than she listened to other people. When this is over, she said finally, what happens to the children? He glanced at her. What do you mean? Clara and the others. She stopped, reformed the sentence. When the hearing is done and the land is settled, I'll need to go to my father's property, get it properly surveyed, secured, managed. She paused. What happens to the children when the arrangement ends? He was quiet for a moment. Clara has nowhere to go back to. Her family left the territory 2 years ago, couldn't afford to stay. She stayed because she wanted to. He paused. Tommy's father works on the Henderson ranch now. He comes up for lessons and goes home weekends. Another pause. The other 2 are in similar situations. You're raising them, she said. I'm giving them somewhere to be, he said. There's a difference. Is there? He didn't answer that immediately. My wife wanted children, he said. It was the first time he had mentioned her. Lillian recognized the weight of the sentence, the way he said it plainly without build-up, because plainness was how he handled the things that were most difficult. She didn't speak. She let him continue if he chose to. We lost our daughter, he said. 3 days old. Eleanor didn't survive the month. He looked at the trail ahead. The ranch was her idea originally. The mountain location, she said she wanted to see the sky without buildings in the way. A pause. She had good instincts. How long ago? Lillian asked. 7 years. 7 years of that quiet house. 7 years of banking the fire alone and listening to wind move through the pines and waking up to mornings that were nobody's morning but his. The children helped, she said. It wasn't a question. They showed up, he said. First it was 1, then 2. I didn't exactly plan it. Something shifted in his voice. Clara reminded me that places need people in them. Houses need noise. He paused. She's 11 years old, and she understands things that take most adults decades. She told me you listen like the person you're talking to is the only one who ever said anything important, Lillian said. He looked at her. She told you that during breakfast, the first morning. He was quiet. Is it true? She asked. I don't know how I listen, he said. I just listen. She looked at him riding beside her. This man who had built a life out of the wreckage of a different life, who had filled an empty ranch house with children who needed somewhere to be, who picked up cut fence wire and read trail signs and told her the truth, even when the truth was complicated, who had sat across a kitchen table from her on the first night and asked what she needed before offering anything at all. She looked at him, and she thought, I am in danger. Not from Victor Crane. That danger she could manage, could calculate, could outmaneuver given enough information and enough time. This was a different kind of danger entirely. She looked back at the trail and said nothing. The hearing notice arrived on day 12. A federal circuit court rider came up the mountain road, official formal, carrying sealed documents that smelled of Laramie and proper legal process. Judge Harlan had received both Edmund Weston's letter and Thomas Whitfield's petition. He was convening a special session in 3 days. Both parties were required to appear. Ethan read the notice. Lillian read it over his shoulder. She sat down at the kitchen table and put her head in her hands for exactly 10 seconds. Not crying, just feeling the full weight of the relief and the terror and the remaining uncertainty, all at once privately in the space of those 10 seconds. Then she sat up and started making a list. Clara, watching from across the kitchen, said, "Good news or bad news?" "Good news," Lillian said. "Complicated good news." "Is there another kind?" Clara asked. Ethan made a sound that was almost a laugh. That evening, Lillian sat on the porch after the children were in the bunkhouse and the ranch had gone quiet. She had the deed and the will, and Daniel Pratt's survey in the leather folder on her lap. She had a list of everything Thomas Whitfield needed, and everything she needed to say to Judge Harlan. She had for the first time in weeks a clear path from where she was to where she needed to be. She heard the door, and Ethan came out and sat in the other chair. They sat without talking for a while. "Are you scared?" he asked. "Yes," she said. "Are you?" "Crane will fight it," he said. "Even in federal court he has resources and contacts and the ability to delay. The hearing isn't the end." "I know. It could go on for months. He could appeal. He could—" "Ethan," she said. He stopped. "Are you scared?" she asked again. A pause. "Yes," he said. She looked at him. He was looking out at the dark at the mountains that were invisible now, except as an absence of stars. "Of Crane," she asked. "Of what happens when this is over," he said, quietly, without decoration. She felt it, the honesty of it, the precision of it. Ethan Calloway, who said exactly what he meant, and nothing extra, had just said something that cost him to say, and she knew it. She looked back at the dark. "The arrangement ends when the case closes," she said. "Yes, that's what we agreed." "Yes." Neither of them said anything for a long moment. "What if I don't want it to end?" she said. The words came out steadier than she expected. She had not planned them. They were simply true, and she had gotten tired of managing the truth the way she managed everything else strategically, with an eye toward cost and benefit and the careful calculation of risk. She heard him shift in his chair. "Lillian," he said. "I'm not asking you to." "Stop," he said. "Let me say something." She stopped. He was quiet for a moment. She could feel him choosing words the way he chose everything carefully, honestly, without performance. "I have not wanted anyone in this house," he said. "In 7 years. Not because I wasn't lonely. Because the people I brought into my life I wanted to be able to keep." He paused. "And I don't know how to want something I'm not sure I can keep." She turned to look at him. "I'm not asking for a guarantee," she said. "I know." He looked at her. "I'm telling you where I am, so you know." "And where are you?" she asked. He held her gaze. "Right here," he said. "For whatever that's worth." She felt the sentence settle somewhere it was going to stay for a long time. "It's worth quite a lot," she said. "As it happens." He almost smiled, the real version, the one she'd been watching approach for 2 weeks, getting a fraction closer each time. "Get some sleep," he said. 3 days. 3 days, she agreed. She went inside. She lay in the spare room in the dark and listened to the pines, and thought about coal under the ground, and her father's handwriting on a deed, and Clara's sharp eyes, and the children's drawings on the wall, and a man sitting on a porch telling her exactly where he was. She thought, "I came here running. And somehow, somewhere in the last 12 days, I stopped, checked." Victor Crane arrived at the federal courthouse in Laramie with 4 lawyers. Lillian arrived with Thomas Whitfield, Hannah Pierce, Daniel Pratt, and Ethan. She saw Crane clock each person as they came through the door. She watched him understand in sequence what each person's presence meant. Whitfield expected. Hannah Pierce. His expression tightened. Daniel Pratt, something moved in his face that he controlled very quickly, but not quite quickly enough. He had not known about Pratt. His contact in Laramie had not gotten there in time. Crane looked at Lillian across the room, and she looked back at him, and neither of them said anything. He gave her a small nod, the nod of a man who recognizes a better played hand. She didn't return it. She turned toward the courtroom doors. Ethan was beside her. "Ready?" he said quietly. "Yes," she said. "You're going to be fine." "I know," she said. "Are you—" "I'm always fine," he said. She looked at him sideways. "That's not true." He paused. "No," he said, "but it's a useful thing to believe." She almost laughed. They walked into the courtroom. Judge Harlan was a spare, precise man in his 60s who ran his court the way a good carpenter runs a workshop. Every tool in its place. No wasted motion. Absolute intolerance for anything that didn't serve the work. He had read Thomas Whitfield's petition, Edmund Weston's letter, and the preliminary materials in the case before the session began, and he had the particular focused attention of someone who has already formed significant preliminary opinions and is now looking to have them confirmed or corrected. Thomas Whitfield was methodical and thorough. He laid out the case in its full shape. The original land grant, the deed, the will, the forged guardianship papers, the fire at the county records office, the private survey, the coal deposits. He presented each element with the calm precision of a man who has been building this structure piece by piece for 2 weeks and knows it will hold. Hannah Pierce testified for 40 minutes. She was steady on the stand, steadier than Lillian had expected, though she shouldn't have been surprised. A woman who had watched everything she'd built for 6 years, rather than stay silent about what she knew, had already proven she could be steady when it mattered. She named the county official. She named the payments. She named the dates. Crane's lawyers objected 12 times. Judge Harlan sustained 2 of them. Daniel Pratt testified for 30 minutes and presented the survey. The coal. When the survey went into the record, Crane's lead lawyer asked for a recess. Judge Harlan denied it. Crane himself did not testify. He sat at his table with the 4 lawyers around him and the particular stillness of a very intelligent man rapidly revising his position. Lillian testified last. She put the original deed on the stand. She put the original will beside it. She answered every question Thomas Whitfield asked her, and she answered the cross-examination from Crane's lawyers with the flat, precise accuracy of someone who has run over every fact so many times that there is no angle from which to dislodge her. At one point, Crane's lawyer suggested that she had entered the protective arrangement with Ethan Calloway as a calculated maneuver to avoid her legal guardian. She looked at the lawyer steadily. "I entered the arrangement," she said, "because there were 3 armed men about to physically remove me from a public road. The motivation was survival. The calculation came after." Judge Harlan wrote something down. At the end of the session, Harlan did not deliberate. He was the kind of judge who deliberated before he sat down, and by the time he sat down, he knew. "The guardianship documents are declared void," he said. "The basis for the petition that the claimant lacked competence to manage her own estate is not supported by any evidence presented in this court. The evidence presented suggests, in fact, the opposite." He looked at Crane briefly. "The land deed and will are entered into the federal record. The estate of James Brooks, including all mineral rights thereto, is confirmed in the name of Lillian Brooks. Any further claims against this estate will be heard in federal court." He set down his pen. "Mr. Crane, I will be referring the evidence presented regarding the county records fire and the payments to a county official to the federal marshal's office for independent investigation. I recommend you ensure your legal affairs are in excellent order." Crane said nothing. His lead lawyer said, "Thank you, Your Honor," with the tone of a man who is already calculating the appeal. Judge Harlan looked at him. "There will be no appeal of a property confirmation order in this circuit without extraordinary cause," he said. "I suggest you advise your client accordingly." He closed his ledger. The session was over. Lillian sat outside the courthouse in the afternoon sun and didn't say anything for a long time. Thomas Whitfield had shaken her hand and gone to handle the filing paperwork. Hannah Pierce had hugged her briefly firmly, the hug of a woman who doesn't do it often and means it completely when she does. Daniel Pratt had nodded at her with the expression of a man settling a debt he'd carried too long, and that expression would stay with her. Ethan sat beside her on the courthouse steps. "It's done," he said. "It's done," she agreed. "How do you feel?" She thought about it honestly. "Like I want to sleep for a week," she said, "and like I have approximately 47 things that need doing on a 3,000-acre property I haven't been able to properly access for 3 months." She paused. "And like I want to go back to the ranch and eat dinner at that kitchen table with those children, and not think about legal documents for at least one evening." He looked at her. "That's very specific," he said. "I'm a specific person," she said. He was quiet for a moment. "The arrangement," he said. "Yes." "Legally, the engagement can be dissolved any time," she said. "I know. I'm not saying it should be," he said carefully. She turned to look at him. He was looking straight ahead, and there was something in his face that she recognized because she had seen it in her own. The expression of a person being exactly as honest as they know how to be and hoping it lands correctly. "Are you saying it shouldn't be?" she asked. He turned to look at her. "I'm saying that what you asked me on the porch," he said. "What you said about not wanting it to end." He paused. "I've been thinking about it. And I've been thinking that I've spent 7 years making sure nothing got close enough to lose," he said. "And I've been thinking that you are already something I'd lose sleep over." He looked at her steadily. "So the question of whether to let it get closer is—" He stopped. "It's not a small question for me." "I know," she said. "I'm not a simple man," he said. "I don't know how to be uncomplicated about things that matter." "I'm not looking for simple," she said. He held her gaze. "I know," he said. The afternoon was moving toward evening, and the air had that particular clarity that follows a long tension released. Down the street she could hear the ordinary sounds of Laramie a wagon, voices the distant work of a place that had no idea what had just happened in the federal courthouse and didn't need to. She stood up. "Come on," she said. "I want to get back before dark. Clara will have something to say if we miss dinner." He stood. "She will." He agreed. They walked to where the horses were tied. She put her foot in the stirrup and swung up, and she sat in the saddle and waited for him to mount. And when he did, she turned toward home. Not toward the road back. Not toward the direction of the next problem or the next document or the next calculation. Toward home. The distinction felt significant. She let the horse move out at a good trot and felt the day's tension begin its slow release through her shoulders, through her spine, through the careful places she'd been keeping herself locked for 12 days straight. The deed was in Thomas Whitfield's care. The survey was in the federal record. Hannah Pierce had her life back. Daniel Pratt had set down the thing he'd been carrying, and she was riding beside a man who had told her exactly where he was. She thought my father would have liked him. The thought arrived without ceremony, without grief, just true. Her father, who had valued straight talk and good instincts and people who showed up when showing up, cost something. He would have sat across that kitchen table with Ethan Calloway, and they would have talked about land and horses and the particular mathematics of mountain winters, and her father would have looked at her afterward with the expression, "She knew the quiet." Certain look that meant he had formed an opinion, and the opinion was good. She pressed the thought close. "You're smiling," Ethan said. She hadn't realized. "I'm thinking about my father," she said. He nodded and didn't ask more than that, which was exactly right. They rode the last miles in the comfortable quiet of two people who have run out of things they need to explain and are simply moving through the same space at the same pace in the same direction. When they came over the last rise and the ranch appeared below them, the solid timber house, the well-maintained barn, the paddocks and the bunkhouse where 4 children were almost certainly making more noise than they were supposed to at this hour. Lillian felt something so simple that it surprised her. She felt glad to see it. She had been running toward a destination for 3 weeks, and the destination had been justice and safety and the restoration of everything her father had built. She had reached all of those things today. They were real, and they were hers. But this lamplit house in the Wyoming mountains, these children's drawings on the walls, this kitchen table that had seen more honest conversation in 12 days than she'd had in 3 months of running, this was something she hadn't been running toward. This had found her. She nudged her horse down the slope, and Ethan rode beside her, and below them, Clara came out of the bunkhouse and shielded her eyes against the last of the evening light, and saw them coming and turned back to the bunkhouse door, and said something Lillian couldn't hear the words at this distance, but she knew the tone. "Come look, they're back." She rode down toward the light. Clara had kept dinner warm. That was the first thing Lillian noticed when they walked through the door, the smell of it solid and real and deliberate. Not an accident of timing, but an act of faith. Clara had decided they were coming back for dinner, and she had kept it warm, and she had set the table for 2 extra places, and she had done all of this without being asked, because that was how Clara operated in the world. She identified what was needed, and she provided it before anyone had to say the words out loud. Lillian stood in the kitchen doorway for a moment and felt something move through her that she didn't immediately have a name for. Tommy looked up from the table. "Did you win?" "Yes," Ethan said. Tommy considered this. "Good," he said, with the decisive economy of an 8-year-old, and went back to his food. Clara looked at Lillian from across the kitchen with those sharp, old-for-their-years eyes, and she didn't ask anything. She just nodded once, the nod of someone who had expected this outcome and is satisfied to have been right, and pulled the pot back to the front of the stove. They ate dinner together, all 6 of them, and the conversation was the ordinary conversation of a table full of people who live in the same space and have accumulated the small shared knowledge of daily life together. One of the younger children, a boy named Pete, who rarely spoke, and when he did said things worth listening to, announced that the gray mare in the east paddock had been limping, and he thought it was her left front shoe. Ethan asked 2 questions, and then told Pete he'd check it in the morning, and Pete nodded with the gravity of someone whose report has been properly received. Lillian watched all of it. She watched Ethan at the head of that table, not performing, not managing, just present, and she thought about what he had said on the courthouse steps. 7 years, making sure nothing got close enough to lose. And here he was at the center of a table full of children who needed him, having apparently decided that some things were worth the risk of losing without ever framing it to himself in those terms. Because Ethan Calloway was the kind of man who did the right thing without needing to call it courage first. After dinner, after the children were in the bunkhouse and the kitchen was quiet and the dishes were done, Clara had done most of them with the brisk efficiency of a person who considers doing dishes a reasonable exchange for being included in the life of a household. Ethan poured 2 cups of coffee and set one in front of her and sat down. They looked at each other across the table. "It's over," she said. "The legal part," he said. "Yes." She wrapped both hands around the cup. "The rest of it takes time." "The land." "The land. The coal survey, there are decisions to make about that. Whether to develop it, how to develop it, who to trust with the contracts." She paused. "My father built that land to be a ranch, not a mining operation. I'm not sure he would have wanted—" She stopped. "It doesn't matter what he would have wanted. It matters what I decide." "What do you want?" Ethan asked. It was the same question he'd asked her, not in words, but in implication, a dozen times over the past 2 weeks. "What do you need? What do you want? Not what is the logical move, not what does the law say, not what will Crane do. What do you want?" She looked at him. "I want to hire a good mining engineer," she said. "Someone who can tell me what responsible development looks like, what it costs the land, and what it gives back." She paused. "I want the ranch to stay a ranch. If the coal can fund that without destroying what my father built, then maybe." She looked at her coffee. "Maybe." "That's a reasonable position," he said. "It's a complicated position," she said. "Those are sometimes the same thing," he said, and she recognized her own words from weeks ago coming back to her, and she looked at him, and found him watching her with that almost smile that she had learned to read, the one that meant he was closer to warmth than he was going to let himself show right now. "Ethan," she said. "Yes. The engagement." The almost smile stayed exactly where it was. "Yes," he said. "It needs to be formally dissolved," she said. "That's what Reeves told us. Filed document requires dissolution filing." "I know. We should do that." "We should," he agreed. Neither of them moved. The fire in the hearth made the sound fires make in quiet rooms. The wind was in the pines. Somewhere outside, one of the horses shifted in the paddock, and the sound carried clean and clear in the mountain night. "Or," she said. He looked at her. "We don't dissolve it," she said. "We file an amendment instead." He was very still. "An amendment," he said. "Justice Reeves can do it," she said. "It's a different document. Instead of dissolution, it would be—" She looked at him steadily. "An extension, with different terms." "What terms?" he asked. His voice was even, but there was something underneath it that was not even at all. "That it's real," she said. "Not an arrangement, not a legal mechanism." She held his gaze. "That it means what it says." The silence lasted long enough that she felt the full weight of what she had said sitting in the room between them, not uncomfortable, not retreating. Just present the way the truth tends to be when you finally let it stand somewhere it can be seen. Ethan set his cup down. He looked at his hands for a moment, the hands of a man who built and fixed and worked and had learned to be careful with what he touched. "I told you I'm not simple about things that matter," he said. "I remember," she said. "I meant that as a warning," he said. "I took it as information," she said. He looked up at her. "Lillian," he said. And her name in his voice was different from how it had sounded at any point in the past 2 weeks, not careful, not measured, just real. "I know what I'm saying," she said. "I've had 2 weeks to think about it. I'm not someone who says things she hasn't thought through." "I know that," he said. "Then say something," she said. He stood up. He walked around the table, and he stood beside her chair, and she looked up at him, and he looked down at her, and there was no performance in it. Nothing constructed or managed, just two people who had been honest with each other under pressure for 14 days straight, and were now being honest about this, which was the one thing left they hadn't said plainly. He reached down and took her hand, not dramatically, not with a speech. He just took her hand, the way you take hold of something you intend to keep. "File the amendment," he said. She felt the sentence move through her from the inside out. "All right," she said. He didn't let go of her hand. She didn't pull it back. Outside, the Wyoming night went on being enormous and clear and indifferent to everything beneath it. And inside that kitchen at that table with the coffee cooling and the fire settling and the children's drawings on the wall, two people who had both learned the hard way that nothing was permanent, made a quiet decision to try anyway. Tug. 3 months moved through the ranch the way seasons do in the mountains. Not gradually, but in sudden shifts, one condition giving way to another almost overnight, as if the land itself made decisions and announced them, rather than easing into them. The federal marshal's investigation into Victor Crane opened within 2 weeks of the hearing. The payments to the county official, the ones Hannah Pierce had documented, with the patience of a woman who understood that records outlast power, formed the center of it. Within a month, the county official had resigned. Within 6 weeks, Crane's lawyers were in conversations with the marshal's office that no longer sounded like confident negotiation, and increasingly sounded like the careful language of men determining what they could afford to give up. Crane himself was not arrested. Men of his particular construction rarely were at first. But the machinery around him was coming apart. The judge in Millerton, the assessor, the 3 deputies with the bought badges, and a man whose power depends entirely on the infrastructure around him is a different proposition entirely once that infrastructure starts failing. Margaret Hollis sent Lillian a note on a Thursday morning that said simply, "He's leaving the valley. I'll believe it when I see it. But the house is on the market," underneath in a different ink as if she'd added it later. "Your father would have outlasted him." "So did you." Lillian kept the note. She put it with the deed and the will and the survey in the leather folder she intended to keep for the rest of her life. Daniel Pratt came by the ranch in the 5th week, not for any particular legal reason that was done. He came to look at the east pasture fence line that needed survey work for a legitimate county filing. Lillian was putting together for the land. He spent 2 days doing the work, declined payment, and when she insisted, he said, "Call it what it is. I'm paying a debt. Let me." She let him. Hannah Pierce opened a bookkeeping practice in Pine Creek. She had 3 clients within 2 weeks and a waiting list within a month, because it turned out that the valley had been quietly in need of someone who understood numbers and could be trusted with them, and the fact that she had testified under oath in federal court against a powerful man and survived. It was the kind of professional reference that couldn't be bought. Edmund Weston came to the ranch for dinner in the 8th week. He sat across the table from Ethan with the expression of a man who has revised a position and is determined to do so with dignity. And he said, "I may have been wrong about you, Calloway. I am not in the habit of saying that, but I am also not in the habit of ignoring evidence." Ethan said, "I appreciate it, Mr. Weston." Weston looked at Lillian. "Your father chose well," he said. Both times. Lillian understood he meant the land and the man in that order, and she felt her father's absence and his presence simultaneously, which was something she was learning to carry the way grief and gratitude could exist in the same place at the same time, neither canceling the other. Clara observed all of this with the attentiveness of someone taking detailed notes that she intended to use later. She said nothing direct about any of it. But in the 9th week, without being asked, she moved her things from the bunkhouse into the small room at the end of the house's second hallway. Not the spare room, the other one, the one that had been empty and was now hers. Because Clara had decided it was time, and nobody who knew Clara questioned her timeline once she'd said it. Tommy asked Ethan if Miss Brooks was going to stay forever. Ethan said, "Ask her." Tommy asked Lillian. She looked at him, this 8-year-old, with serious eyes and the best instincts of any child she'd ever met, and she said yes. Tommy nodded. "Good," he said. Clara already moved her things. It was 3 months and 4 days after the hearing when Victor Crane made his last move. She had not expected it to come the way it came. She had expected lawyers' appeals, another legal maneuver, Crane operating through the mechanisms he'd always used, the slow institutional pressure that was his native language. What she had not expected was the man himself. He came alone. No riders, no lawyers, no deputies. One man on a gray horse on a Tuesday morning riding up the South Road at a walk, and when Ethan's hand came to the ranch hand to say there was a single rider coming, Lillian looked out from the porch and recognized the horse, and felt the particular cold clarity she'd learned to associate with Victor Crane's presence. Ethan came to stand beside her. "I see him," he said. "He's alone," she said. "Yes." "That's new." "Yes," Ethan said. Crane pulled up in the yard and looked at them both from his horse, and didn't say anything for a moment. He looked different, not diminished exactly. But the composure that had always made him feel slightly unreal, like a man performing the role of himself rather than actually being himself, had shifted. He looked like a person, an older, tired person who had made a calculation and found it didn't add up the way he'd expected. He dismounted. He looked at Lillian. "I won't take up much of your time," he said. "I'm leaving the valley. The house sold yesterday." He paused. "I came to say something, and I'm going to say it once." She waited. "Your father came to me 8 years ago," Crane said, "before he was sick. He had a proposal. He'd identified the coal on his land, done his own informal survey, and he wanted a partnership. Joint development, shared revenue, both operations maintained." He looked at her steadily. "I turned him down. I thought I could get the land outright eventually. I thought I was being patient and smart." He paused. "I was being greedy. There's a difference." Lillian looked at him. "Why are you telling me this?" she asked. "Because you're going to develop that coal," he said. "You'd be a fool not to, and you're not a fool. And when you do, someone is going to approach you with a partnership offer, and you're going to spend the rest of your professional life being careful about who you trust." He looked at her with something she had never expected to see on Victor Crane's face, not quite regret, but its functional equivalent. The offer your father made was reasonable. I want you to know that he was right and I was wrong. It changes nothing. But I wanted to say it. He remounted. He looked at Ethan. Calloway. Just the name. Crane, Ethan said. Just the name back. Crane turned his horse and rode away down the south road and did not look back. They stood on the porch and watched him go. Did you know? She asked. About my father approaching him. No, Ethan said. She was quiet for a moment. He was already thinking about the coal. Before he was sick. He had a plan. Of course he did, Ethan said. He was your father. She let out a breath. He would have been furious about all of it. Yes, Ethan said. And then he would have gotten to work, she said. Yes, Ethan said. She looked at the empty road where Crane had been. I'm going to get to work, she said. I know, he said. She turned to go inside. There were letters to write. A mining engineer, Thomas Whitfield, had recommended a county survey to finalize, and Ethan caught her hand as she passed him. Not pulling her back. Just holding for one moment the way you hold something you've chosen. She stopped. She looked at him. What? She said. Nothing, he said. Just... He looked at her. You're all right. Or... She knew he didn't mean it the way you'd mean it after a scare. He meant it the way you'd say it about a thing that has turned out to be what you hoped it was. Confirmed, steady, real. So are you? She said. He let her hand go. She went inside. The evening it happened was an ordinary evening. That was the thing she would remember most. Not a dramatic moment, not a constructed scene. Just an ordinary Wyoming evening in the 4th month, with dinner finished and the children doing what children do when the adults aren't watching closely enough, and the first cold edge of the coming season in the air. Ethan had gone to the ridge. She found him there the same way he had found her, not planned, not staged, just following the direction a person goes when they need to see something large enough to hold against the weight of everything accumulated. She rode up and pulled alongside him. He looked at her. Couldn't sleep, she asked. Wasn't trying yet, he said. Just thinking. About, he looked at the mountains. About how this was the place I came the night Eleanor died, he said. This ridge. I came up here because I didn't know what else to do, and I needed to be somewhere that was bigger than what I was feeling. He paused. I've come back up here every time something happened that I didn't know how to hold. She looked at the mountains with him. Good things too, she asked. Mostly hard things, he said. Until recently. She turned to look at him. He was looking at her. I came up here 3 months ago, he said. The night after we got back from Laramie. After you said what you said at the kitchen table. And, she said. And I sat up here for an hour, he said, trying to find the reason it was a bad idea. He paused. I couldn't find one. She felt the sentence land exactly where it was meant to. You should have told me that then, she said. I'm telling you now, he said. It's been 3 months, she said. I know, he said. I move carefully. I've noticed, she said. He reached into his coat pocket. He put something in her hand. She looked down. It was a ring, plain gold, unornamented, the kind of ring made by someone who understood that the value of a thing is not in its decoration. It fit her finger exactly, and she knew without asking that he had measured it the same way he measured everything carefully, accurately, without ceremony, getting it right. She looked up at him. Ethan Calloway, she said. Lillian Brooks, he said. Is this? Yes, he said. It is. She looked at the ring on her hand. The amendment to the filing, she said. Already makes us legally engaged, he said. This is the other thing. The part that isn't legal. He looked at her steadily. The part where I'm asking. She looked at him for a long moment. This man on his black stallion, on the ridge above his ranch in the last light of the day. This quiet, careful, complicated man who listened like you were the only person who ever said anything important and told the truth even when it cost him, and had filled an empty house with children who needed somewhere to be, and had ridden hard off a ridge one afternoon for a woman he didn't know because it was right. She thought about everything that had happened in 4 months. She thought about her father's note in the margin of his ledger, a habit he had marking things he intended to return to find out what you're made of and then act accordingly. She had found out. She had acted accordingly. She looked at the ring. "You could have asked me at the kitchen table," she said. "I wanted to ask you here," he said. "Why?" "Because this is where I put the things that matter," he said. She felt that move through her completely. "Yes," she said. "Yes, you understand." Or yes, she said. "I'll marry you, Ethan. Yes." He reached over and took her hand, the one with the ring on it, and held it the way he'd held it in the kitchen that night, simply with the full intention of not letting go. Below them, the ranch was lit against the coming dark. She could see Clara moving between the house and the bunkhouse with the purposeful energy that was entirely Clara. She could see Tommy's small figure at the paddock fence, checking on the gray mare the way he'd been doing every evening since he noticed the limp. She could see the lamp in the kitchen window, the one that had been lit every evening she'd been here, the one that had been lit alone for 7 years before that. "You told everyone I'd be yours before sundown," she said. He made the sound she'd come to love, that low sound, just before the real smile arrived. "I was wrong," he said. She looked at him. How? He looked at her fully, steadily, with all the attention he gave to everything that mattered. "You were never mine," he said. "You chose me." She thought about the open prairie 3 months ago, and a horse going down hard, and 3 armed men and a rider coming over the ridge at full speed toward something that wasn't his problem and never had been. She thought about a kitchen table and a telegraph line cut in the night, and a leather folder, and a federal courthouse, and 4 words on a piece of paper dropped in the dirt by a frightened man who chose at the last moment to be something better than frightened. She thought about all the ways a person arrives at where they are. She squeezed his hand. "So did you," she said. The sun went down over the Wyoming mountains, the way it always did, without asking permission, without ceremony, simply completing the thing it had always been doing. And on that ridge, 2 people who had each been broken by different griefs and rebuilt themselves into something harder and more honest than what they'd been before turned their horses toward home. Not because one had claimed the other, not because the law said so, or the custom said so, or fear said so, but because they had looked at each other clearly in full daylight with nothing hidden and said, "You. I choose you." That was the whole of it. That was everything. Some choices once made do not require repeating, they simply become the ground you stand on. The direction you face, the life you wake up inside every morning and recognize as yours. Lillian Brooks rode down off that ridge, a free woman who had chosen, and Ethan Calloway rode beside her as a man who had finally let something close enough to matter. And in the ranch below, the lamp burned in the window, and Clara had already set 6 places for breakfast because Clara always knew.